From my blood come the prince that was promised, and his will be the song of ice and fire.
Confirmed harem members: Daenerys Melisandre. Strong possibility: Missandei. Maybe / up for debate: Tyene Sand, Nymeria Sand, Oberyn Sand, Ellaria Sand, Daisy Mormont, Valyria, Sansa. Not happening. Coming of the Dawn. Chapter 3: The Savior Cometh. What is this? Was Jon's first thought as he looked at himself. The last thing he remembered was bleeding out in the snow as he stared up at the moon and whispered the name of the woman he loved. He stared at his pale dead flesh and tried to feel his heartbeat, only to feel none. I am dead, then. He thought to himself. So why am I in Dorne? Jon looked around only to see riders approaching. One of them, despite being younger, was still recognizable to Jon. Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, Lord of Winterfell, had a grim expression on his face as he arrived at the Tower of Joy, with 5 other men behind him. His eyes hardened, as he eyed the 2 remaining knights in white standing guard at the entrance to the tower. Dismounting, he approached them. Jon looked at the 2 Kingsguard and thought this must be Ser Arthur and Ser Gerald Hightower. His widened in realization as they walked past him. Am I seeing a vision of the past? Ser Arthur Dayne looked between each of the men before giving Eddard a respectful nod. Lord Stark. I looked for you on the Trident, he called out to the knights. We weren't there, Arthur Dayne answered. Your friend the usurper would lie beneath the ground if we had been, Lord Commander Gerald Hightower added. The Mad King is dead. Roygr is the one who lies beneath the ground now. Why weren't you there to protect your prince? Kingsguard stay with the king, Arthur said. What? Jon got in shock. Are they insinuating that Rhaegar had another legitimate son besides Aegon? Eddard looked at the tower again, and then at the 2 Kingsguard. Where's my sister Arthur? The Sword of the Morning steeled his resolve and said, I wish you good fortune in the wars to come, Lord Stark. Both Gerald and him donned their helmets. And now it begins, Ser Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning announced. Gerald drew his sword and Arthur drew Dawn, and a simple longsword, holding Dawn in his left and the longsword in his right. By the old gods. Am I really about to see this with my own eyes? Jon thought, watching the entire scene with anticipation. No, Eddard said with sadness in his voice, now it ends. Eddard and his men drew their weapons. Lord Howland Reed attempted to rush Ser Arthur with a single-handed overhead strike, but Ser Arthur parried his strike with Dawn, and fluently sliced open Howland's stomach with his ancestral sword, causing him to shout in pain and fall to the ground, taking him out of the fight, as Eddard attacked Arthur, stabbing and slashing with his longsword, but Arthur parried each of his attempts while backing up. Lord William Dustin was engaging Gerald Hightower, who had already dispatched Ethan Glover. Lord Dustin parried away Gerald Hightower's slash while pivoting. He bashed his shield, which held the Stark insignia on it, at Ser Gerald. But Gerald had taken a step back, causing the shield bash to miss, while he forced it away with his hand, putting William Dustin off balance. William attempted to regain his footing and slash at Gerald, but the Lord Commander of Aerys Targaryen's Kingsguard roared as he plunged his sword through William Dustin's chest, causing him to die. Gerald then proceeded to remove Lord Dustin's body from his sword. Ned swung his parried strike around for an overhead strike, only to be parried away by Dawn. He went for a thrust, only to be parried away by Arthur Longsword. He stabbed again, only to be parried away by Arthur's twirling dual-wield style, and Ned had to pivot to regain his position in order to block Arthur's dual sword strike, which sent Ned stumbling away. Ser Gerald attempted to attack Ned while he wasn't prepared, but Ned parried away the strike and fluidly plunged his sword into Ser Gerald's neck, the point coming out the back of his throat. A bit of blood spurted from his wounds as the Lord of Winterfell pulled his sword out, letting the light fade from the White Bull's eyes. Theo Wall, Ser Mark Ricewell, Martin Castle and Ned Stark encircled and surrounded Arthur Dayne, like a pack of wolves stalking a nice juicy meal. But Arthur was no prey, as he twirled around his swords a bit before they engaged him. Arthur's mastery of the dual-wield style was on full display as he parried away 2 strikes, one from Theo and one from Castle, before pivoting and kneeling to block 2 strikes from Ned and Mark. It went on like this for several moments as they would try to overwhelm him with multiple strikes. A good strategy, and had he only been using one sword, they would have eventually overwhelmed him, but Arthur trained to handle any sort of situation and his dual-wield style was perfect for this. After several moments, an opening was created in the Northman four-direction assault. Arthur was now outside of their box they had made for him, and while the Northerns were still attacking at least two at a time, they were in a neat little line. They tried to encircle him again, but the master swordsman wouldn't have that happen again. Spinning Don and his longsword in his hands, he delivered a swift kick to Mark Ricewell, causing him to fall down. Mark attempted to get back up, but his neck was exposed for a moment, which was all the sword of the morning needed, as he swiftly pivoted and delivered a masterful slash, which parted Mark Ricewell's jugular vein, killing him instantly. Arthur was as good as the stories say. I certainly don't know if I could have pulled that off, Jon thought. Theo Wall, Meryton Castle, and Ned tried to overwhelm him, but the Arthur kept parrying away their strikes, wasting not a single drop of energy in his movements. Within a few moments he had kicked away Martin Castle's shield, causing him to stumble away, allowing Arthur to parry two strikes from Ned Stark and Theo Wall. He then turned his attention to Martin Castle. He used both sword and Martin attempted to block attack with his one sword, but Martin's sword pushed over to Martin's shoulder, allowing Arthur to open the castle's neck, while Ned could only watch. Theo and Ned attacked, but the two of them couldn't hold the great swordsman off for long. Arthur parried and knocked Ned away, while Theo Wall attacked with an overhead that was blocked by Arthur's longsword while simultaneously plunging Don through his heart. Arthur pulled his family's ancestral blade out while he twirled his sword around in order to relieve any tension in the wrists, encircling Ned. The stories all say the same thing. That Ned Stark was able to kill Arthur Dayne. But how? When Arthur is leagues above my father. They hardened each of their faces before Ned opened with a slash, but Arthur parried and went on the attack. Without any other opponents to worry about, he went on the attack, forcing Ned to back up with every strike. They went back and forth like this several times, where one would be forced on defense, then they would turn it around and go on the attack. He really is good, Arthur got as he disarmed Ned and poised on to finish him off, but this ends now. But it was not to be. Jon saw Howland Reed silently approach Sir Arthur from behind and stab him through his exposed neck with his dagger. Within a few seconds, Arthur no longer had the strength to stand or even hold Don as blood spurted from his neck. Edric quickly got over his shock and grabbed Don, posing himself to put an end to Sir Arthur. Arthur looked up at him, a blank expression on his face, as if he regretted nothing at all, and Ned sliced his head completely off, killing Sir Arthur instantly. He stabbed him in the back, Jon thought with shock. No wonder my father never told the truth. He didn't want Arthur's memory to be tarnished. Staggering back and resting on his sword, Edric turned to Howland. I owe you my life, Howland. Howland simply smiled. There are no debts between friends. Before Edric could insist, a scream from a woman caught the attention of them both. Go. Howland insisted, I'll handle things here. Needing no further push, Edric ran up to the tower as the Northern Lord took care of the bodies. As he ran, another scream echoed through the tower. Jon followed him. Upon reaching the top, Edric burst into a room where he saw a bedridden woman holding a boy a little over a year old. With them were two other women, handmaidens, Edric supposed. Ned. The woman whispered. Lyanna. Edric called out. He placed his sword at the foot of the bed and knelt beside his sister. Lyanna Stark looked to the side slightly as she met the eyes of her brother. So that's my Aunt Lyanna. Jon thought. Is that you? She whispered, is that really you? I'm not dreaming. Edric held on to both of Lyanna's hands with one of his own, while the other stroked the side of her head. No, you are not dreaming, sister, he replied with a sad smile. I'm here. Right here. I've missed you, big brother, Lyanna said, as her body seemed to sag. I've got you, Lya. It's okay now, we can go home. Oh, Ned. How I wish I could. I can't, Ned. I don't know what's wrong, but my time is near. She coughed before uncurling around the child she held. I'm sorry, Ned. I hated Robert and didn't want to marry him. I fell in love with Rhaegar and we got father's permission to marry. We were going to announce it to the realm, but Brandon and father were killed before we could. Take him, Ned. Promise me you'll take care of him, she gasped, clutching at her brother's tunic. Edric gazed at his nephew, taking in his appearance. He looked to be older than his son Robb, by a year or so. He had tufts of black hair as dark as Robert's. Edric also noted that his nephew had stark gray eyes. Much to his surprise, however, the babe was silent throughout all this. His name is Naruto Targaryen, Lyanna continued, her breaths growing shallower. He's mine and Rhaegar's son and heir. Promise me you'll raise him to be a good man, Ned. Pro. Promise. Me. Lyanna, I promise, please hold on, we'll get you a healer. Stay with me, please. Edric cried out, all but begging. Edric gently picked up his nephew, who started crying, as if realizing his mother's passing. Easy, little pup, all will be well. You have the blood of the wolf, like your mother, yet you are a dragon like your father. I will protect you, little one, no matter what the cost. Little Jon, he gentle whispered, trying to soothe the boy. What? Jon got in utter shock whilst both hands gripped his head. This can't be right. I'm a bastard, not a Targaryen. I can't be a Targaryen. My mother was just some unimportant tavern slut. My father was Ned Stark. How could I possibly have been a Targaryen the entire time? For whatever reason, Jon looked at the mirror in the room, as if hoping to see his old looks. To his dismay, he saw his face, but with silver blonde hair that was so pale it looked white, vibrant royal purple eyes, clean-shaven face, and black sclera. No, Jon got desperately no. Jon shouted, and in his despair, punched the glass so hard that it cracked. Apparently, in the past, the glass in the mirror cracked as well, causing Ned to look at the cracked mirror, then look around the room, but seeing nothing, left to meet up with Howland. Jon, on the other hand, fell to his knees with his eyes closed, clutching his head as if desperately trying to find some way that this wasn't true. That what he had been told his whole life was still true. That his entire life hadn't been a lie. Yet as his eyes opened, he came upon another scene. Two people were saying their wedding vows in front of a weirwood, while another woman and a small child were watching. He recognized Lyanna from the previous scene. The silver-haired man must have been Rhaegar. So who are the two Dornish folk? Then he realized it must have been Elia, and the little girl must be Rhaenys. The scene changed yet again. Jon was back in the Weird Tower in Dorne, where Ned Stark slew Arthur Dayne. He walked back into the tower only to see Rhaegar and a pregnant Lyanna lying in bed together. Rhaegar was lying on his side, his head propped up with one hand while the other lovingly caressed Lyanna's pregnant belly. My love, Lyanna said. Have you got about what we are going to him? Rhaegar asked, but there was a certain playfulness to his tone. You're convinced it's a boy? Motherly instincts, Lyanna playfully retorted. You're convinced he's a girl? Can't help it. Considering I already have a Rhaenys and Aegon, it's natural I would want Visenya as well. Fine, Lyanna relented. If I'm wrong and he's a girl, you can have your Visenya. But if he's a boy, I think I want to name him Naruto. Naruto? Rhaegar asked. After the man who started my family's line back in the Freehold. Yes, Lyanna said. I had got of Jon after one of the old Stark kings, but our son will be a dragon prince. He needs a name fit for one. Rhaegar cupped his wife's face and looked her in the eyes with love and adoration. No matter if he's a Naruto or Visenya, I will love our child, and all the children we will have together, my little wolf. Their following kiss was both loving and tender. Jon covered his mouth with his hand as his breathing became haggard and tears rolled down his cheeks. His parents had loved each other. They had loved him. He had been loved. But scene shifted one final time. He was back in Castle Black, but it was a long time ago. The Lord Commander, who had long straight silver hair, was missing his left eye, while the other one had a blood-red iris. The master in the room was none other than Maester Aemon Targaryen, back when he could still see. Why are you leaving Blackfyr with me, Uncle Brynden? Aemon asked. Jon realized it. The Lord Commander was Brynden Rivers, or Bloodraven, the man who killed Aemon Blackfyr. I can't take it with me on this ranging, Aemon, he said. But why, Uncle? Aemon asked, confused. Because I won't be coming back from this ranging, Brynden said. I'm going after the Night's King. It matters not whether I succeed or fail. I won't make it back. Brynden bit his finger, drawing blood, and wiped it over a section of wall, causing that section to reveal a hidden compartment with another sword, a crown, a suit of armor, and a chest with stuff in it that Jon for some reason could not make out. Just as Daenerys Targaryen foresaw the doom, I have foreseen the coming of the Redeemer. He will be born when our house has been brought to its knees. If I fail, he will be the only one with any hope of ending the threat of the Walkers forever, and redeeming our house and restoring the Targaryens to their rightful place as not only kings but as dragon riders. I leave all this for him so that when the time comes he will have all the tools he needs to succeed. Jon was overcome with emotion, but at the same time he felt hopeless. What could he do now? He was dead. It's a burden, isn't it? Being the hero, I mean. Jon heard from behind him. He turned sharply behind him, expecting an enemy, only to see a pillar of flame that was twice as large and 5 times wider than Jon.
Let you know, I need to ask you for